Please welcome Perry Osnes, Vice President, Legislative Affairs for Compeer Financial.
Good morning, everyone. You know, there's something you can count on each year when you're involved in the agriculture and food sector, and it's this Ag and Food Summit. And it's so fun to see so many familiar faces, make some new acquaintances, and hopefully you're experiencing that today. We've heard a lot of great information this morning, economic data that points out how important the ag and food sector is to Minnesota's economy. Thanks to all of you here in this room, and also some important insights by our last speaker from an economic perspective. We know there are challenges, but there are also opportunities in agriculture, and that's why we are involved in this great industry. Our next discussion focuses on one of those opportunities, sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF. It's my pleasure to introduce the panel of experts representing distinct segments of the biofuels supply chain. Joining us today for this panel discussion is Jeff Davidman, Vice President of State and Local Government Relations with Delta Airlines, Jamie Goner, Director of Global Business Development of Novel Feedstocks from BP, and Frank Kolish, Assistant Commissioner of Air and Climate Policy with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Moderating our panel discussion today is Matt Herman, Chief Officer, Demand and Advocacy with the Iowa Soybean Association. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Well, thanks for the round of applause, everybody, and thanks for inviting us in this morning. We were having a little discussion backstage, and we all realized that we're kind of agri-growth rookies largely up here, so please be nice to us, and as you have questions throughout, feel free to enter them into the chat, and we'll be able to see them and ask the panel any questions that you have. But just to get started here, let's maybe start off with a couple introductions. Jeff, would you like to start off?
Sure. Well, thanks so much, Matt. And not only am I an agri-growth rookie, I'm still pretty much an agricultural rookie in general, having worked at Delta Airlines for the last 20 years. But it's just a great thrill to be here today and talk about sustainable aviation fuel. You know, when we think about it from a Delta Airlines perspective, we've set a goal and a target to get to net zero by 2050. And as we look at our carbon footprint, 90% of that is what happens in the air. And when we look at it specifically and break down that 90%, 70% we believe is going to be accomplished through sustainable aviation fuel. It is our greatest lever that we have to be able to get to our goal. And the great thing about SAF is we know it works today, right? It works at a 50-50 blend level. It works in our infrastructure on the ground with our pipelines. It works with our infrastructure at the airport, can go right into our planes. We know it works with our planes. We know it works with our engines. So that's all really exciting. It's this incredible product. The problem is, and what I'm looking forward to talking about with everybody in the room today, is there's just not enough of it. And what does exist is 5 times the cost of conventional jet. So we have a lot of work to do, but the most exciting part is we know we have a product that works today.
So it sounds like from the Delta perspective, the airline industry is ready to create a huge market for it, which is really what farmers love to hear. But we've got to figure out how to turn that biomass into fuel that your planes can use. Maybe, Jamie, you can talk a little bit about that and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jamie Gaynor. I am the Director of Novel Feedstocks Business Development at BP. And I am just 6 months into this role and 6 months with BP. Prior to joining, I spent my career in agriculture. I was also born and raised in rural North Dakota, so joining an energy company that's headquartered out of London has been quite the change. I will say, though, the reason I joined is because there's such an opportunity to collaborate across the value chain. And when I say the value chain, I mean farmers, I mean seed technology companies, I mean research, I mean the fuel companies, all the way to our customers, airlines like Delta. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to be part of the solution. So I'm looking forward to this discussion today.
Frank, maybe you can give a little introduction to yourself and how MPCA is going to play a role in this.
Great. Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for having me this morning. My name is Frank Kolash. I'm Assistant Commissioner for Air and Climate Policy at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. In my role, I assist Commissioner Kessler in chairing the Climate Subcabinet, which is made up of 16 state-level departments, agencies, boards, and councils to advance climate action in Minnesota, and particularly through our Climate Action Framework. And I've been working at the Pollution Control Agency for 28 years now in the climate space for the last 16, and particularly focused in the most recent years on something that Jamie pointed out, and that's the cross-sector efforts that we are going to need to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals, our climate resiliency goals, and our clean economy goals that we have in our climate action framework to make sure that we are moving across the various sectors, and then the particular opportunities we have across those various sectors specifically to put those together and then come up with the kinds of products that are needed. They are decarbonizing our economy, making those opportunities, but then also, as Jamie said, looking for the benefits and the opportunities throughout the supply chain for making sustainable aviation fuel.
Great. Thank you, Frank. Maybe to kick off, maybe not everybody in the room is truly familiar with what this sustainable aviation fuel product is, what it's going to be made, how it's going to be made. Maybe, Jamie, you can set the stage a little bit and help the audience understand what this product is and how BP is looking at potentially making it.
So SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, globally today it only accounts for 1% of all of aviation's total fuel use. So it's quite small. And the most important thing to walk away with here is it's very similar to conventional or fossil jet fuel, and it's processed very similarly. Except the biggest difference is that it's made from non-fossil fuel feedstocks, such as waste oils, animal fats, and plant oils like soybean or non-food cover crops. As Jeff mentioned, it can be used as a drop-in solution, meaning it meets the same technical specifications as fossil jet. However, you can't simply put it in a plane today. So the big challenge we have is there's a maximum of 50% blending, and but as like any of us, if we get on a plane, that is the safety standard today, and safety is the most important thing.
Perfect. Jeff?
Well, I think Jamie did a great job of describing what it is, and maybe I can just give a little perspective on what the market looks like from a number standpoint. So I know you were probably told there'd be no math today, but I'm going to give you a few numbers just to sort of think of. So as you think about what this market potentially could be. So early in this decade, the U.S. airline industry made a commitment that by 2030, we wanted 10% of our conventional jet fuel to be replaced by sustainable aviation fuel. That number is 3 billion gallons to get to that 10%. U.S. airlines use about 30 billion a year. In 2023, there were 25 million gallons of SAF made in the United States. So we have to get from 25 million to 3 billion by 2030. And as you start thinking about it, if you were to replace, and if you can increase that blend rate from 50-50, which is what's certified today, but you could increase that blend rate over time, you know, it's about a 30 billion gallon market just in the U.S. And then beyond that, this is not just a Delta solution. This is not just a U.S. airline solution. This is what the entire international airline industry is talking about the best way to decarbonize a difficult to decarbonize market. You're talking about closer to 45, 50 billion gallons of SAF. That's sort of what that market looks like on a worldwide perspective.
And maybe to help the audience here too, as a bit of a perspective, the U.S. biodiesel and renewable diesel industry on road, you're talking between about 4.5 to 5 billion gallons. The U.S. corn ethanol industry, you're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 billion gallons. So to grow from 25 million to 3 billion over this short period of time could create a huge demand for commodities. But as we know, as you've kind of pointed out, Jeff, this product today, either because of scale or because of cost, is not necessarily cost competitive. And we're seeing a number of policies across the United States, Europe, both at federal and national levels, but as well as at the state, right? We have Minnesota policy here to support sustainable aviation fuel, Nebraska, Illinois. I couldn't help when the earlier presentation, The Economist is talking about these different state levers, and I'm sitting here from Iowa saying, you know, we might lose out on this race to sustainable aviation fuel because we don't have policy. So the question for you is, with all this, is it enough? Are all these layers of support enough to really grow from the 25 million gallons to the 3 billion gallons that you want to see?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I would say it's a really good start. So if you think about where we were in 23, I gave sort of the number of what it was just in the US, but across the globe, there was about 250 million gallons that were produced in 2023 of SAF. In 2024, we're expecting about 650 million gallons, so about 3 times the amount. And that's really because of the work that's been done internationally, but really in a large part because of what's been done right here in the United States and what's been done here in Minnesota. So if you look at the Inflation Reduction Act for 2022, there were credits that were put in place, 2 different credits that were put in place to try and encourage the production and the blending of sustainable aviation fuel. It's a really good start. The problem with those credits is they're just way too short in duration. So if you're looking to scale up an industry and make the investments that Jamie's company and others needs to be able to make, 4 years just isn't enough. And so as we start thinking about what needs to be done more at the federal level, the entire value chain is looking at how do we get those credits extended. In addition, we had rulemaking that came out at the federal level on both the 40B tax credit and the 45Z credit. We know there's work to be done. 40B really didn't work for the Midwest agriculture industry and the growers. 45Z, there's work to be done in order to make sure that Midwest feedstocks can really participate and thrive in that. So I know there's work being done across the value chain on that. And at the state level, you're right. The federal government sort of set that first stack of incentives in place. We've been really excited about what's been going on across the country, but no more so than what happened right here in Minnesota. Governor Walz, the Minnesota legislature, really leading in the policy. So in 2023, the Minnesota SAF tax credit was passed, which is a $1.50 producer/blender tax credit. That is great. That sent a wonderful signal to the industry that Minnesota wants to lead in this space. But the other thing that Minnesota did that doesn't get talked about as much, which is really exciting, is they also included a sales tax exemption on construction materials for both if you're going to build a new facility in Minnesota or you're going to refurbish a current facility to start making SAF. Again, that's a open for business sign that Minnesota put up that no other state has done. And we're excited about what that's leading to. Just last week, DG Fuels announced their plans to build a brand new SAF facility, 193 million gallons to be built in Moorhead, which is really exciting, the first new announcement in Minnesota. Gevo, who's located in Laverne and has a smaller facility there currently, has received a grant from the federal government for $16 million to try and ramp up their production. So the work that Minnesota has done is already paying dividends. And so I think what we're seeing is that the policy in place is a great start, but we have to keep going.
That's great. And it brings up something, and I want to move to Frank here. We're going to have to build facilities. And so what is MPCA's interest in not only expanding the availability of sustainable aviation fuel, but what do you see as the state agency's role in helping get these facilities built and permitted and operating?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Some of these I mentioned in my opening comments, but number one is it does move us forward on our climate reduction goals for the climate action framework that we have in Minnesota. So we'll get greenhouse gas reductions from this in the transportation sector, in the agricultural sector, and in the industrial sector as well. It will help us build climate resiliency for our landscapes as we experience a changing climate. And it's also importantly going to help us grow a clean economy in this critical part of Minnesota's economy as we move forward through those various supply chains and looking at the various opportunities that we have for the pathways to produce sustainable aviation fuel. It's also going to be important for us to recognize this point in time in Minnesota where we have so many people coming together. We have capital interests available, money available. We have both the state and the federal tax incentives that are available to us. We have a lot of people in this room that are interested in doing that, and we have a lot of work happening within the climate subcabinet about how do we bring this forward. So looking across not just the Pollution Control Agency, but the entirety of our subcabinet of how do we recruit these kinds of facilities, then how do we efficiently and with certainty go through the environmental reviews processes that may be necessary and the permitting processes that may be necessary so that we can really capitalize on this opportunity right here, right now, and that in Minnesota we can have that demonstration where we're leading the way on developing sustainable aviation fuels from multiple pathways, reducing the greenhouse gas inputs and emissions from this very difficult to decarbonize sector that has international connections to it, that also is a social necessity and will not have many viable alternatives, especially for the larger jets, for a few decades because of the new fuels and then all of the safety certifications. I think there's really an opportunity for Minnesota and the Pollution Control Agency and our sister agencies to work together to make sure that we are providing the kind of support to move this forward, as much as the tax incentives at the state and federal level, and the investment interest and the interest in building these moving forward.
That's great. I know that's going to be music to the ears of project developers who are really looking to site these facilities in the Midwest, close to the feedstock. Maybe moving to you, Jamie, you know, many people here might be a little surprised to see a company like BP sitting up on this stage talking about biofuels. You know, for a long time, this space has been dominated by kind of traditional standalone biorefiners, you know, the renewable energy groups and the poets of the world. And now we see Chevron, BP, the large super majors getting very interested in this space. Why do you think that now is the time for BP to get involved, and why is sustainable aviation fuel the product that seems to drive BP's interest in this market at the point?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Matt. The first thing is it's aligned to our environmental and sustainability goals. So similar to Delta, BP aims to be net zero by 2050. The second thing is a portfolio fit. We know there will be a lot of solutions to lower carbon emissions in the world's energy supply, but it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone in this room that BP is interested in biofuels. And it's simply because it's been a sweet spot of something that's been in our portfolio for decades. We make liquid fuel from feedstocks. So the second thing is the portfolio fit. The third thing is our customers' priorities. Our Air BP business is one of the top 5 aviation fuel suppliers, supplying billions of gallons of fuel to hundreds of airports worldwide. So we're connected to our customers' priorities. I think 4, we're up to the challenge. So aviation is one of the hardest industries to decarbonize because there's really no practical alternatives to liquid fuels today. I think you might have mentioned it. If you were going to have a 787 take off today, battery operated, it would not get off the ground. So it's too heavy. And then meanwhile, probably the 5th thing is demand and growing demand. The economy's growing. More people want to fly, and we expect over the next 2 decades that airline passengers will reach over 8 billion passengers. So not only is it good for the environment, it's a good business opportunity, and that's why BP's here.
Maybe I could just add, because I've heard electric planes kind of referenced a few times in the last couple, and I'll just sort of say it from the airline industry. You know, we're 60 to 75 years away from an electric plane, as Jamie said, that you would get on today at MSP and fly any distance. I think what you might see in 2030s, 2040s are sort of small 4-person, almost like taxi cab planes that can fly a short distance, you know, between a suburb and MSP or something like that. But to get to a point where you're talking about an electric plane that you would go to MSP today, get on the plane, and feel comfortable in flying in, you know, that is 60 to 75 years away. So, as Jamie said, we need other solutions in this space.
And I understand you guys are still buying conventional planes with conventional engines, right?
Correct.
And those planes are likely going to have a lifespan of 30 or more years. So we're going to have this huge fleet, right, of planes that we're going to have to continue to fly. And I'm sure you can, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but if we looked at the lion's share of where jet fuel is going, I would assume it's these large transatlantic flights rather than these domestic short-haul flights that are more likely to be electrified.
Yeah, I mean, again, when I give that number of 60 to 75 years, that's including, you know, the flight you take from Minneapolis to Detroit today. You know, and you're right, like we have an ongoing renewal of our fleet program that we've always had at Delta. We'll continue to have that. We're bringing in new planes. They're quieter, they're more fuel efficient, but they're still going to need conventional jet fuel. And you know, the hope is that blend rate of 50-50 could go higher over time, but it's still going to need conventional jet fuel in the short term.
And if I could add, even if we view hydrogen as a fuel, that's still a ways away because they're testing that now, but it also has its challenges, and we don't have a good supply chain for that amount of green hydrogen that would be able to power that and decarbonize that. So it really does create the case for why sustainable aviation fuel now, because it is a drop-in fuel at the 50% blend rate and does have demonstrable decarbonization benefits that come with it.
So I think you guys have all made the case here really well that we're going to continue to burn liquid fuels in airplanes, and we're going to continue to need them. And so then the next question becomes, where are they going to come from? this is probably, if there's any growers in the room or grower organizations, this is the question that's on their mind, especially with the current and future policy coming in to support this. And I'd offer this up to anybody who would want to answer it or opine on it, but what feedstocks do you see coming in to make this fuel in the early days? And do you think that they're going to hold on to market dominance in the long term, or do you think there'll be other feedstocks, other processes that will come in to produce the lion's share, 50, 60 billion gallons to fill this 100 billion gallon market in the long term? Jeff, Jamie, Frank?
I'm happy to comment.
Sure.
So BP is looking at many options. So we started, our early focused work was around beef tallows, soybean oil, so plant oils, and carinata oil, which is a cover crop, a non-food cover crop. However, our goal is to continue to reduce the CI, of a carbon intensity of all feedstocks. So when you ask the question about by 2050, it's not it will be this or this, it's an and. If you think about the EU mandates and the growing volumes, there isn't enough feedstock if we continue to commercialize even new energy crops, new brassicas like camelina, carinata, pennycress.
And I'll add to that. So I think Jamie is absolutely right. What's really exciting about it is we're so early in this, right? In this industry and scaling this industry that we don't know what the future holds. And so you're right. Today we can make it from corn, we can make it from soy, we can make it from forestry residue, we can make it. There's hydrogen as a feedstock that people are looking at. Cover crops like camelina as well. And that's really, again, why we're so excited about Minnesota is that Minnesota is home to all the feedstocks that we know today and what we're looking at in the future that gets grown here that can lead to the production of it, which is another just great opportunity for Minnesota. From a Delta perspective, we are feedstock neutral, we are technology neutral. To meet the definition of SAF, you have to have a minimum of a 50% carbon intensity reduction versus conventional jet. And we're just really looking forward to what innovation is out there that can lead to that. But for us, any feedstock is a possibility as long as it can meet that standard of SAF. It's really exciting to see, and I think just a great opportunity for the entire value chain and everybody in the room here today.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, viewing it from the pollution control standpoint, we're technology agnostic as well, tracking very closely the carbon intensity calculation, wanting to get that as low as possible. But yeah, I agree that it is an and orientation here because we will need so much, and there are so many opportunities for the input feedstocks, and location will matter on where feedstocks best match up with what's available to produce the sustainable aviation fuel. And that's not just the commodities, if that is corn, soybean, or other winter oil crops. It's also could be looking into the food production system. There's high-strength food waste that's coming out of those facilities that can be run through anaerobic digestion, create some of the base carbon methane molecules, and then using green hydrogen, which now connects us to where's the green electrons available, where's the transmission, the generation, where does that fit, and then how do we move that around and get it to the places then it can be used in an airplane. So I think all of the feedstocks are going to have opportunities for growth because there's such a demand for it, and we can look for geographic matching about where do the right feedstocks meet with the right technologies and the right forms of electricity, the availability of water, and then the impacts on air quality, water quality, and the groundwater.
I think that's a very important point. I mean, making sure that these policies, these markets are creating demand for the materials that are locally available to convert them into these into these final fuels and create markets both for farmers, for the value chain partners. A couple things that were said here were interesting and leads to the next question, which is, many of these markets, as we're seeing them, the carbon intensity, if you will, is going to be a large driving factor of this. What is the role of different supply chain partners, right? We've got refiners with potentially some of the largest, research capabilities sitting here. We've got end users, we've got government. I'm sitting here at the checkoff representing farmers. What are the roles of the value chain partners to work together? What is the forum that we work together to really reduce these carbon footprints? Because, it was referenced in one of the questions up here that, if we don't, and Jeff, you said it, if we don't meet this baseline, we just don't qualify. And that's a really scary thought. So what is the opportunity for us to all collaborate to make sure that farmers are in a position to supply these markets?
Please.
I'm happy to start. So, at Delta, we know how to run an airline, and we're able to tell you today, what our needs are from a consumption standpoint. So from a Delta perspective, we use 4 billion gallons of conventional jet every year. Our 10% number is 400 million by 2030, and we're 100% committed in getting to those goals. But that's the end of what we know in this space. We have no idea how to make it. We know we don't know that, and so we are looking throughout the value chain to bring everybody to the table to help us solve this problem. How do you scale this industry? We can be the ones, and the airline industry have the responsibility to tell people, the growers, the producers, and everybody in the room in the value chain, there is a end consumer who wants to buy the product if it can meet all these specs. We're there, we want to buy it, but we don't know how to do it. And so, one of the ways we're trying to do it is through working with the value chain. In Minnesota, we've started the Minnesota SAF Hub, and that's whole job there is exactly that. It's that, how do we bring everybody to the table when there are issues, when there are questions? How are you going to find the energy that you're going to need? How do you make sure that a facility is sited in the right part of the state? How do we know which feedstocks are going to be best to be used? To bring everybody to the table who knows more than we do about this to try and answer those questions. And agri-growth is going to play an extremely important role in that conversation as well. As you look out and you see who's in the room today, it's everybody in this room that we need to have come to the table to help us solve the issue.
And I will add some comments that we heard when we were talking about a clean transportation standard just for the general vehicles, not just aviation. And one of the important parts is making sure that everyone is getting the benefits of this new system. So making sure that if farmers are being asked to do additional work to add value to the stream to reduce the carbon intensity, that they are receiving the benefits of that through the supply chain, that it's not being blocked or hindered at some point, and also that the communities that are hosting these facilities are getting the benefits of hosting a facility, and also that their health is protected, their environment is protected as well. So I think it's really making sure that there is a broad conversation about who is benefiting from this new technology and making sure that those financial incentives that are coming out, because there is a price premium that is being paid for it. It is being driven by tax policy, but also international policy, that the people being asked to make the changes and make the commodities are also benefiting from this supply chain.
Yeah, I would just add a couple of comments quickly. So the first one is very similar to what Frank said. We need to ensure the incentives are aligned, and that innovation is happening at every step of the value chain. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is we need pragmatism on the production methods. So when we think about standalone facilities versus co-processing at refineries today, we need to increase those limits of feedstocks that are able to be processed at the current refineries. And then third, there's finite amount or supplies of used cooking oil. So we need to ensure that there's support for a broad range of feedstocks and not just one type. I think at BP, we're very serious about this. We recognize the need to collaborate with everybody in this room, and we need to continue pushing forward multiple feedstocks, multiple pathways, and multiple technologies to solve this global issue.
That's great. Well, we have a few minutes left. Maybe as we close it out here, if we just take one step back here, we've talked about some state policy opportunities. We've talked about federal and international policy opportunities that are going to help create this market. But as you guys look at this from your various seats in this supply chain, and you are king or queen for the day, is there anything that you would do different to really goose this market along or push it out quicker?
So I think it kind of goes to what we were just talking about in the last question, which is 100% that we need the entire value chain. So, at Delta Airlines, as we started to think about the where and who should be leading this, we looked at our map, and every time we looked at it, Minnesota just kept jumping off the list, And it started with, I used to call it the sort of the triple crown. It's grown so much since then, but in Minnesota, we have the feedstocks that you need to make it, we have the history of the production to make this fuel, and we have a hub airport that's thirsty for it, 270 million gallons a year at MSP alone. And that's where we started. And then the state of Minnesota decided to take the lead and pass public policy that said, we want to be out front, we want to lead in it. Then the business community has come together and said, hey, we're really excited about this too. We're going to start this Minnesota SAF Hub. We've got the University of Minnesota and the research facilities here. So when I think about it, we need everything that you referenced, Matt, and then we need the entire value chain. We need the growers, the producers, the end users, and everybody in between to come together to figure out how do we scale this, how do we solve this problem. And there's just no question in my mind that Minnesota and the Midwest get to lead in this space because nobody yet in the world is. So this is a great opportunity here.
Frank, Jamie?
Do you want to? My magic wand would not really be on the technology or the regulatory side. It's going to be on the education side, so that the customer that's standing in Minneapolis St. Paul Airport boarding their plane on Delta knows that it's using sustainable aviation fuel, and they have that education, that understanding that that entire supply chain drives all the way back to things that are happening on the ground in Minnesota, in various parts of Minnesota, whether that's growing a crop or if that's someone operating a SAF facility that's using biogas from food waste, but being able to understand that and value that and be able to communicate the importance of this is made not just in Minnesota, but we're proud that it's made in Minnesota, and it's on the jets that we're flying out of because that's what we want to do. We want to go places.
That's a great message. Thanks. Yeah. Jamie, any last thoughts?
Last thoughts would be, so this morning I spent some time at the Minnesota Soybean Association table, and we talked a lot about the agronomic system and how important that system is. And I would just say that the science behind that, the understanding of how it's going to impact soil and the farm gate, bringing that into the business decisions is going to be critical. And I think finally, not using, or not impacting food supplies and food stocks. I think that would be the second thing that I didn't mention that I wanted to make sure this group walked away with.
Great. I want to throw one out for the audience too as we close out. I think one other partner that we should really bring to the table on this conversation is ultimately going to need to be the livestock industry as well. I think in the initial days of biofuels, there was this competition, this idea of competition that was created between consumers of corn and consumers, animal consumers and fuel consumers, and ultimately we realized that, hey, we made a whole bunch of distillers' grains, and then we were able to feed that. I think as we think about some of these things that Jeff and Jamie and Frank talked about of really increasing agronomic intensification, how are we going to grow more feedstuffs to make biofuels? We are inevitably going to make more proteins. Whether it's the camelinas or the carinatas, the winter annual canola that we're trying to see down in Kentucky and other states, or even, say cover crops going through a digester, they're going to result in proteins. And I think we've got to make sure that whatever we're bringing onto the market, and of course, selfishly, I'm saying this as the soybean guy who's sitting on top of the feed pile, we've got to make sure that all of this is going to come together and also work in a ration. Otherwise, somebody talked about squeezing the balloon, right? We're going to squeeze the balloon on the protein side, and that could end up being a challenge for farmers who are not only producing feedstocks to make energy, but also food, fuel, and fiber. Mm-hmm. So thank you guys for coming on today and having this conversation with the audience, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.